should be.
Someone you're using now.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
I'm good.
You good? Okay. We'll be running back and forth. We'll be stopping.
Okay. I can shut it. Okay. You're here for joyful error messages. Get back up here. All right, good morning, although it's going to be afternoon here shortly. I'm Nicole Capuana. When asked what I do, I always hate responding with my job because I feel people are so much more than that. So to give you a little slice of who I am, I play Ninja Turtles and dinosaurs with my 5-year-old son. I like to cook for others. It's the Italian in me that just wants to make people happy with food. And every Monday I practice yoga in the middle of an airport. So back when I started my career, the web was just getting started and I hopped on and rode the evolution of UX and product design. 15 years later, I've covered every aspect of UX, the UX umbrella, and today I'm the Director of User Experience at Lean Dog here in Cleveland, and I work on a boat. For those of you who don't know Lean Dog, pretty awesome workspace. So aside from the early days where I used to code and do design, I worked exclusively since then on transactional software, where I have to design and craft the experience of people coming into a system and getting their job done. So I live in this framework of doing, and I tell people that when I do my job well, nobody ever notices because they just come in and use it and move on with their lives. And I follow a script, I'm sorry, did not get it memorized. But I am going to tell you a bunch of stories, so if you want to save your questions to the end, I'd be happy to answer them then. So, but there's always errors, and errors never make anyone feel good. It's tempting to wait and tackle errors at the end of your project. You know, when you know the right amount of things that are going to happen, the types of things that you're going to have to account for. But I think it's really valuable to start thinking about those earlier in your project so that you can start to think around what the experience is, what that content strategy is. And when you address them earlier, I think you can give us a level of thoughtfulness and help improve the tone and even infuse a bit of joy or potentially delight. So years ago, I saw Andy Budd speak about creating moments of delight, and it's really stuck with me. He spoke about any sort of content in the right context can be delightful. And he used the example of a message on the bottom of a milk carton saying, oops, you should have turned me over when the spout's open. And more recently, Dan Safer has been espousing the importance of micro-interactions, things, small details that can make or break the experience. So both of these have really resonated with me, and it's the devil in the details. But I think with mindfulness and thoughtfulness, we really can bring a bit of joy to something not as nice as errors. It's easy for us to want to only focus on happy paths, but inevitably we have to plan for sad paths. What I'm seeing coming towards us are more and more things are getting connected, and as architects and designers, we now need to architect for experiences that are moving beyond screens, beyond devices, into robots, into wearables, and across channels. Things communicate with each other, they communicate with us. Sensors are recording every detail and they're brimming with valuable data. And information is being communicated with lights, sounds, and sensations, which means there's way more things that we have to consider as architects and how we get attention without being invasive. So in light of today's theme of architecting happiness, I'm going to share with you some tales from my work and experiences around errors that touch on delighting users and how architecting experiences and information is getting more and more complicated. I want to share two experiences I had where I crossed the channel and errors abounded and the experience was compromised. So first up is the bad. A few years ago, I was traveling to the Lean UX conference in New York City, and as I was preparing to leave for the airport, I got a call from United Airlines. They told me that my flight was delayed, and it wasn't delayed just a little bit, it was delayed by 5 hours. So while I was pleased that they had called me, I still thought 5 hours seems like way too long to go hang out at the airport. I went home, I picked up my son, I had dinner with my family, right? But before I could even finish packing up my bags to leave work, the airline called again, and again, and again, and again. They literally called me every 5 minutes to tell me of the smallest change. Gate changes, departure time changes by mere minutes. So at first, I appreciated them calling me. It started to get a little annoying. Nevertheless, they continued to call. And I had to deal with it, right? They were keeping me up to date, which I did appreciate, although for every little nuance it was a little much. But they called, and one of the calls was that my flight was canceled. So I was like, okay, things will work out or whatever. But they call me back 5 minutes later, and they tell me they put me on another flight. And that flight leaves in an hour, and I live 30 minutes from the airport. So I race to the airport. My anxiety, as many of you can imagine, right, is like through the roof. And then I'm trying to catch this flight, and every minute that ticks by is just like, really amping it up, right? But now I need to print a new boarding pass since I'm one of those people who does not have a printer at home. I've never had a printer at home. And the boarding pass that I have on my phone was for the old flight. So I know that I have to go into the airport and find some way in one of the kiosks to print my boarding pass. So I enter the airport, and there's an entire bank of 40 kiosks, completely open. They're all not working. There's a few United Airlines employees at one of the kiosks, so I go up to them and I say, can you help me, right? Like, that's what you normally do, you United Airlines people. And they're like, we're not on the clock. It's not a problem. I was like, okay, there's no one else around. So now I'm like, okay, get my phone out. I'm trying to go onto the website on the phone, like give them my name and like this new flight number, and they're like, this just doesn't compute. The information is not matching up to our records. All sorts of things wrong. So I was like, oh crap. So my plan is to then go to the one security gate that's open with my old boarding pass and hope that whoever's at TSA is going to be really sympathetic and let me through so that I can eventually find someone on the other side who could get me the correct boarding pass, right? So now I'm chugging to, I think it was like the middle gate at Hopkins, right, the security B. And as I'm walking past these 40 kiosks, I see one that I think is working. So I go over to it, and it is. Great, thank God. So I get my my boarding pass. But I had interacted with phone calls, with the web, both on a computer and on my phone, and kiosks, and humans, and the experience just sort of fell apart all over the place, right? So I started to think about ways that they could have improved that whole experience, and maybe the simplest approach to start with would be to put a light on top of the kiosks. Red to tell me it's not working, and green to tell me it was. Because those people, for the United Airlines people who weren't on the clock, I could have just scanned and said, oh, kiosk 28 is the one that's open. That would be a really simple fix, aside from their IA of errors and communicating systems and stuff. So that was a bad experience, right, where I had crossed pretty much every channel with United. And now I'm going to tell you about a good one. So recently I was trying to buy some icons at Icon Finder, and typical of any stock site, it made sense to buy $10 versus pay $1 and $1 and $1. So I was like, whatever, I'll just buy $10 worth of icons and I'll use them up eventually. So I put my credit card in and I get an error. I thought, well maybe I miskeyed it, because it's Saturday morning, my son's running around, I had to let the dogs in 50 gazillion times, right? So maybe I miskeyed it. So I put it in again and I get another error. So I'm like, all right, I'll go over to create an account, and probably in create an account, I can then go buy some icons and just say I want to get $10 worth of icons. So I go through that route, I get another error. Okay, I just need these stupid icons to get one task off my list. So I'm in the process of putting it in one more time, and the phone rings. It's my bank. So I'm sort of stunned that they're calling me because they report that there's suspicious activity happening on my account. And I tell them I'm trying to buy some icons. Let me get it all sorted out. But I asked them what made them call me, because it literally was real time, right? I'm in the process of trying to buy an icon, and KeyBank is calling me. And so, as someone who designs these type of systems, I'm curious. What put the flag up at KeyBank to say, we better check on this, let's call Nicole. So in the end, it was a 17-cent charge. So I wonder if Icon Finder puts forth at first, a 17-cent charge to your card to say, is this card valid? Before they do the whole charge. But on KeyBank's side of things, they're like, this is weird, right? Because the KeyBank person was like, do you trust the site? I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's icons, come on, $10. I think they're probably okay. So anyhow, that was a good. In the first example with United, right, the experience broke down quickly and induced frustration and anxiety. And in the second, while annoying with Icon Finder, became rather delightful that someone at KeyBank reached out, a human called me, and we got it all sorted out. So in both examples, though, it was crossing these channels that really impacted that experience. On the KeyBank side, it was definitely like a proactive reach out, but definitely appreciated as a customer, right? So the inspiration for this talk was a use case I had to account for when I worked at Progressive. We were migrating the mainframe system to the web, and there were many use cases that would lead a user to a stop page. It wasn't necessarily an error, but it required the customer or the agent to call into Progressive so that an internal rep could actually handle the case. Now for the business, this made the most sense to use these pages because it was often costlier to build the functionality to allow the self-service. Or there were regulations or rules or whatnot that said, customers can't willy-nilly do these certain things, but somebody internally can work with the system, right? So we call these call progressive pages. We call them CPPs because we just like to acronize everything, right? And so I'm sure some of you who work in large corporations can sympathize, right, that everything gets an acronym. But these CPPs were all the same. They'd say, we're sorry, please call us at 1-800 blah, 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 blah. And occasionally, we'd be smart enough to be able to tell them why or what happened. That was like the cause of why they were getting this stop page, but it wasn't always the case. So there were some cases, unfortunately, that were just like, you're SOL, just call us, right? But there's this one particular CPP that was extremely rare. And because of the rare chance that it would happen, I thought it was a perfect candidate for a little more personality. The case was due to the way the system versioned policies. For example, it meant that if two people, let's say Bob and Jill, were trying to make a change to the same policy at exactly the same time, whoever completed their change first would create a new version of the policy. So Bob gets his changes in, and then Jill, who's still making her change, when she gets to the end, she's now on an invalid policy, right? She has no course but to let's start over. So when she gets to go to apply her change, she can't. She gets the CPP instead. For this case, I really wanted to inject something much more human and joyful into the experience. Instead of saying, call us, we could have said something like, today's your lucky day. You've encountered something that only happens once in a blue moon, and we're really sorry. Call us and we'll help you complete your change. Or maybe, wow, the odds of this happening is like getting attacked by a shark. You should buy a lotto ticket today because you have amazing luck. In the meantime, give us a call, we'll get your policy all sorted out. We're really sorry. Now, I'll make the caveat, I'm not the best wordsmith, right? But I could have gone with something like that. That would have been much more delightful to encounter than the call us, with no reason why. But at least in that case, right, like, I mean, it was so ridiculously rare, I really thought we should do that. Business, of course, did not. So if you are a progressive policyholder, you could potentially trigger off this case. It probably happens once a year. But either one of them would have been way more fun and a little bit unexpected. So I have a project that I'm working on right now that's using a smartphone app to control a robot. It's a pretty exciting project, but there's so many more complexities than I expected. The robot's supposed to be out of sight and out of mind once you get it set up. It's not something you're really interacting with. It just does its job. The project has much broader end-to-end experiences. So, like I said, where I've done everything in user experience, this project is one of my most challenging, right? Because it's everything. It's the content, it's the IA, it's the physical experience, it's the phone experience, and there's the buying and the unboxing, which leads to the product setup, both physically and digitally. And once it's set up, the user shouldn't have to do too much. But with all systems, there's going to be errors. And so when something like an error happens, that leads into a whole service and support experience, right? It's huge. So the complexities really are quite abound with design and information architecture. And our challenge is to create something that has some personality and account for those errors and make it believably smart. So the key word is believably, right? These things are actually really dumb. And across all of these experiences, we're following the following design guidelines. We need to make it approachable. We need to make it easy to set up. We need to make it simple, yet sophisticated and powerful. And we need to require as few steps as possible. As we started this app design, we had some big challenges on how best to convey the information without being creepy or robotic. So we suspected that we'd need to give personality to this robot, and we confirmed this with usability testing. Over 75% of people we tested with anthropomorphized the robot. Interestingly enough, they referred to it as male and thought of it as a pet. So with that validation that they did feel like this is something that's part of the family, we started to bring in some personality with the robot speaking through the app. The owner could at any time check in on the robot and see what was up. And we ended up with really friendly statuses like, I'm working, I'll be done in 10 minutes, or I'm resting. And people really responded well to this. So that was like the easy, happy stuff, right? The I'm resting or I'm working. And then there's now the errors. So we're thinking of how to continue to bring this personality forward with errors, and how do we sprinkle in a little joy or that personality, right? Our goal throughout this was trying to make our errors as recoverable as possible. Nobody wants to get to the end of the line and have to pick up the phone and call support or have somebody come service it, right? So there's still some of those that happen. But there's a few cases where the robot, remember I told you they're sort of dumb? They actually get into situations where they need a human to come help it out, right? It flips over. It can't flip itself back over. So we tested with the message, help me. And people were like, oh! They got really worried that they'd have to go immediately rescue the robot. And they got particularly anxious that they weren't home when this happened, right? So they get this message that said, help me, etc. We gave a little explanation of, let's say, help me, I flipped over, right? So they were like, oh crap, I gotta get home, and I'm not home, I'm at work, and we're like, okay, that's a little too intense. So, because it is not the end of the world that this robot's in this state. So we decided we'd tone down, help me, and we'd add a layer of don't worry, right? I need help, but don't worry, whatever you can. And while that tested better, it still wasn't right. So instead of help me, we went back to that friendly status of I'm doing. And we ended up with, I can't do my job. And the subtext of don't worry, I'm safe, just come help me when you can, right? Which tested so much better. It was just that friendliness, it conveyed the error, but it wasn't people were like, oh my God, this thing's out of control. And back to that, because any of these robotics aspects is you want to make them friendly and approachable, right? And you want people to worry that it's, terrorizing the neighborhood. So there was another case we had to communicate with the robot that required the user and the phone to come close to the robot. We were going to have to communicate over Bluetooth, which there's a range for Bluetooth, right? And we could have said something like, this only works within 30 feet. But instead we interjected some playfulness. We had a little speech bubble show up, and it just said, "Come a little closer." And literally, people were like, they came close to the app, and then they were like, "Oh, yes," like, and they would start to walk towards the robot. But I was like, yes, you know that works when you see people literally like come closer to the phone. So another thing we've been considering, and this project's going to continue on for the next year or so, but with all the possible things we communicate, we chose to reserve our push notifications to only things when the robot couldn't do its job. Because we didn't want, back to that believably smart, this thing's just doing its thing. I shouldn't care what the heck it's up to, it's just doing it. And it's only when it's, I need the human that we're going to use those push notifications. So I tell you the story because as we bring more and more robots into our lives to help us, they're sensing and they're censoring, and as they develop the smarts to learn and adapt to our commands, giving them some level of personality can make them effective in communicating with us without it feeling like we're entering a brave new world. So I have a theory, and this is a whole separate talk, but that nobody reads anything. And at most, the information we carefully architect gets glances, skims, or scans. And with mobile and wearables and the Internet of Things, there's a whole new conveyance of information, and I think it's a good thing. So now we have the ability to start to communicate with sound, light, and sensations. Did you know that there's something called ear cons? They're small sounds that convey a little bit of information. A whoosh, whoosh, a ding, right? And I'm just going to give you a heads up. Trying to look for an ear con is more painful than trying to find a stock photo. There's no taxonomy to these. You're like, I got 100 pages of swishes. Is that a swish down, swish right, swish up? Like, is it a boing? Like, I don't know. Like, it's really hard to tell when you get these search results as you try to hunt to find those small sounds. I just went through this for another project, so I'm just sharing that with you that more of that's coming. It's really painful. So, sounds up till now really haven't been as important to consider as a mechanism to provide feedback, at least for my work in web apps and primarily in the web, but as we move to mobile, there's more and more sounds coming in. And as we have more and more things connecting and you know, whether it's a Nest thermostat or a robot or your refrigerator, there's sounds and lights and things that are going to happen that are going to convey things to us, convey information. And they're really about enhancing our experiences and our interactions with almost all these systems. I think sound conveys a feeling and a sense of perspective that we're actually interacting with the components. Like we're getting really, you know, flat design aside, right? Like as you start to touch things, even kiosks or like get into your phone, you're manipulating things. Things are moving. And having that movement and a sound to accompany it, you know, really enhances that type of experience. And we can also start to move to light for visual cues. Seeing a color change on a dial or a glowing light bulb allows us to immediately consume that information with very little cognitive load. I saw this woman give a talk at a conference, I guess last spring. She had hacked together 2 Hue light bulbs, and she hacked them to read her Twitter stream. And one took the last 5 tweets, and the other took the average of her tweets. But it measured sentiment. So they would glow green for if they were like happy sentiments, and they would glow red if they were negative sentiments. And she encouraged the whole audience to like go nuts. And so these 2 light bulbs would just pulse and glow green or red, right? That's a way to communicate, to consume information and be like, oh, things are good or things need attention, right? Without me having to go into an app. It's just in my environment, it's around me. I can glance at it, I get it, and I move on, right? And I think the same is true if we start to use light. We have the haptics, right? The senses. Vibrations and pulses, flitters and flits, all can be useful to help grab our attention. We of course need to make sure, though, that we're not going overboard. We don't want to go into like sensory overload, and we don't need to be running straight into Futurama. but I do believe we're going there. So as information architects and designers, we have to balance out when and how we notify, and that's true of just back to the robot example and the push notifications, right? We have to carefully choose when and how we notify that person. But with any of the stuff that we work on, it's a balance. And so depending on the context of the system, we need to consider how we communicate. We wouldn't want everything to be like code red, like the help me, like come grab me now, right? Like, I would guess that most of us do not work in that type of space. Now, if I'm in the middle of an emergency room and I'm building systems that help physicians do their job of saving lives, I probably do want some sort of sound or light or some other communication that does sound that alarm for when it's a life or death situation, right? But for most of us, we're probably not working in that sphere. So as much as it's tempting to be like, pay attention to me, if everything's saying pay attention to me, it's going to be hard for us as users and our users that we design for to really pay attention. So I just caution you guys. I think the subtlety of sounds and lights, they allow us to communicate without being aggressive. And I think they enhance the experience. Now, I don't really have any cases to tell you about how I've tackled using sounds and lights and haptics, but I do know what's coming in my next year with a few of my projects I've got lined up, and I think it's only going to snowball. So next time you see me, maybe I'll have more tales to tell. I did have a kiosk project I just worked on where I did have to dive into the ear cons to find the little sounds to convey, oh, you just moved that to this bucket. But that wasn't a terribly connected type of thing, but still, it was enhancing the design. So the devil's in the details. It's really true. I think here's a few things that you can do. Start thinking about errors early and what could possibly go wrong. Consider the context, where your users will be and how they'll be using it. Map the entire experience across channels and devices. Show a little personality where it makes sense. We don't want to be overly cutesy unless like maybe that's your target market, but it's a balance. Consider how using sound and light and haptics can enhance experiences, and try to make errors easy to recover from with very little effort. I think it's really easy to fall into the trap of like, oh, we'll just spit out the gobbledygook that devs gave us and not pay any attention to it, but can you get the user to be able to recover themselves? And so as we look ahead at the types of experiences coming in with the avalanche of connected products, I think it's imperative that we start to think of errors and these experiences beyond just the words we use. So those are my tales. I probably blew through that. So I'll take questions.
Hi, I'm sorry I missed part of your presentation, but I'm intrigued. So just curious about the sort of project structure in the initiatives that you're working on. Are they mostly managed with the waterfall method or agile?
We're agile all the way,
Okay.
with a whole bunch of lean startups sprinkled in.
Great. So talk to me a bit about the detail of how your sprints are being executed and all that.
So for all of you, I know a few of you in the room know Lean Dog, but Lean Dog, we live and breathe Agile. Half of our company goes out to big enterprises and helps them transition to Agile. Those of us who are on the boat who build custom software use those same Agile principles and practices, but we also apply a lot of design thinking, lean startup methods to help us, right? So we have our project teams. We start every project with what we call as a deep dive. We make the client come in and we talk about what the heck we're doing. We go wide, we explore like the long-term vision, but we narrow in on what's our next actionable steps and what's the highest value thing to work on. And then we, as UX, I think it is a challenge to work in an Agile environment. I think the Agile Manifesto was written without necessarily a designer in mind. But it's definitely recognized, right? And so I think UX is in this strange place of like, how do we fit in? Because I, as a UX person, have to think of the whole. The dev is pulling a card that says build log out, right? And I can't work at that really small level without it being a cluster when I get to the outside, right? So what we've started doing is we have a whole discovery track where we do a lot of that research, we do some concepting and experimentation and getting in front of people and testing it out and validating, like, is it right or is it wrong? And it's really meant to just be conceptual. It's not like, here you go, here's a mock, over the wall it goes. It's, we know enough of that whole experience that we can then break it down and have devs start working. So starting Monday will be the first time I kick off a project with a formal cross-functional pair. So my discovery track starts Monday, and I'm gonna have a dev tied to my hip. We're gonna be a pair. So we practice what we preach. We learn from what we've done, and we're like, how do we improve? And so one of the things that's really come out of all of our work is we continue to improve. So we started doing the UX discovery, and now we're like, well, we need to get dev more involved so they get empathy. You know, that it's not like some magic sauce to go interview people, right? I mean, anybody can do it, take practice to get comfortable. So that's how we work. And it just depends on the project, like the robot one. They want to have a milestone in June. I don't think we'll hit that date, and it's not our side, it's their side. But that's easily a 3-year project.
That's helpful. Thank
So
you.
small, large, single person startups, big massive enterprise, all, but really around that software of doing. Like, it's really rare for us to do just a website.
So with error messages, do you like try to take a holistic approach to them, or do you sort of polish them as dev comes up with them? Because I don't think there's like any real plan on the dev side to deal with
So
error messages.
one of the things I do for my own practice is I create what I call an interaction diagram. It's similar to a process flow, and that's really trying to take the whole application and break it apart. And I might not have screens yet, but I know I have to account for it's going to go through these steps. And then I can plug into that and iterate on it so that we say, oh, well, this component here is actually going to call this service. And while the cloud should always be there, there's the case where the cloud falls down. Make a note, we're going to have to account for that, right? So we try to get as many surfaced as possible. And I find that that diagram really helps because I can also talk through it with the developers. And they say, oh, well, what about this thing here is going to do this wacky thing? And I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. So let's plan for it, or let's adapt, or, you know. So at the beginning, we get a sense of there are these errors or sad paths that we have to account for. And then inevitably, as you develop, there'll be more that come up.
Okay.
Right? Like the policy version at Progressive just was one of those late game things where we were like, oh crap, like the way we've been doing versioning, that's gonna impact one person every 2 years. So
How do you like straddle the line between being too cute and almost like pissing somebody off because it's that cute, and giving them real relative information that they can take to an 800 number and say, getting error code XYZ, help me?
So that is a balance. So with the robot example, where it is, one, it's really small real estate, so you don't want to give them the big long system error. But it's enough that can drive them to tutorials or videos for them to self-service. And yes, there's going to be a point where somebody's going to have to help them, and we still have to tackle that. But most of what we're doing is to get the user to recover it. Ideally, if the robot can recover itself, but when the human has to intervene, that the human can do most of it. So it's a balance, and so you start out, like we thought, we had the hypothesis that people would expect this robot to be humanistic in some way, and so we started with that type of voice, and we realized that our voice to start was bordering on too cute or wrong, right? It took many iterations to find, right, how do we simplify it down? How do we still get our point across and not border into like, I'm extremely creepy, I'm watching a robot, and I'm not like just this little toy. Because this particular robot has a job to do. I know errors as architects, aren't necessarily our favorite thing to deal with, but we do have to deal with them.
What is the robot's job?
I can't tell you. I had to figure out I could tell you all about that without revealing who they were.
So besides error messages, you also talk about the use of sound and light as additional input or feedback components of an experience. I wonder, we think also about that, and we also think about transitions, right? Some movement or animations that can help you understand what's going on. So I wonder, from a UX perspective, what's your perspective on owning that component, that piece, right? And sometimes those fine details, which are very important for the experience, are lost in translation between handling wireframes to creative, where they beautify it and they get it to the developers and they code it, and then those transitions, animation, sounds, lights are lost in translation there.
So-
Should we as UXers own that piece?
Yes, and I think there's two things, right? You're talking like a big company and very defined roles. I work right next to my developers, and I'm gonna pair up when they get to that card, because I just gave them a wireframe or mock-up that's good enough, with maybe some notes on it that we're gonna build together, right? So then I can say, well, what's the right sound, and I should have sort of in my toolbox, these are the ones I've considered. And then the kiosk project I just did, I had to create wireframes or mock-ups. This particular client wanted mock-ups to sell the vision
Right.
to the stakeholder. But we're talking a 3D animated experience, and I'm like, yeah, it's paper, right? That I'm handing them these mock-ups. So I had to annotate like on the diagram to say like, and this just slides up, and this one goes this way, and this turns around, and you can pinch and you can pull, and right? And that was hard to sort of annotate all that, but then it required a conversation, right? I had to sit down and explain that diagram. And then I tried to get to a prototype, clickable prototype with like a vision or whatever that would mimic it, but that's, that's a little jaggedy, right? But they still got it. Now, when that comes into development, I'm gonna have to really pair up with that dev.
Thank you.
More questions? You guys are hungry? Ready to bail? All right, well, thank you. Oh, yes, I get your messages, but it's a little hard. Yeah. So one, I'm happy to sit down and do a presentation. Okay. It would be probably in, yeah, just reach out to me, give me my card, yeah, going downtown, just follow me and plan something. I run the lead startup circle in Cleveland, and I'm plan it out like 6 months in advance. Okay. Well, yeah, just as long as I can plan into it, I'm happy to come down. I just can't make it regularly.
That's perfectly fine.
So,
I thought it'd be neat to do like a, some type of presentation where, we would do air messages and we would work with the team to kind of create your messages based on certain situations and information.
cool. I also have I have a whole bunch of topics I'm happy to share with you. Okay. You can decide what seems right.
Yeah, that'd be great. Perfect, thank you so much.
All right, well, nice to meet you, Tasha. Thank you very much. All right. More Post-it notes. I was to say, Post-it notes and chocolate is what I figure every UX person needs.